All right. September 17th, 1796. George Washington, we all knew it was coming. The father of our country laid out the warning in his farewell address. Political parties may now and then answer popular ends. They're likely in the course of time and things to become potent engines by which cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men will be enabled to subvert the power of the people and usurp for themselves the reins of government, destroying afterwards the very engines which have lifted them to unjust domain. While not every word that Washington says is gospel, I would like to think that we should heed this warning and take extra care and examine it, especially with the hindsight of the last 229 years, to see if it has lived up. Now, more than ever, it has become clear that political parties have a stronghold over our democracy and has a hand over its throat. They act as gatekeepers, filtering candidates and ideas. So you must be politically gridlocked, voting for what people would call the lesser of two evils. Now, we've heard that more than ever before. So let's take a look at what that looks like. 45% of Americans are identified as independents compared to the split of 27% Republican and 20% Democrat. Despite this, 0 out of the 435 House representatives are independent. Only 2 out of 100 senators are independent. That is 0.37% of Congress, representing 45% of Americans. And only 17% of these Americans trust the government to do what is right. On the other hand, local government trust sits at 67%. That's interesting. Let's look into why that is. It seems that 96% of elected officials are local elections, and roughly 80% of those local elections are through. Okay, sorry. It's interesting because 96% of elected officials are from those local elections, and 80% of those elections are through nonpartisan elections, meaning there's no R and D next to the name that makes them inform their decision, meaning that they have to run off of policy, removing the uninformed and voter going up and clicking for their team, making candidates actually have to compete in the marketplace of ideas, generating a more representative democracy for Americans. Today, I hope that we can flesh this out through my other teammates here and have a good conversation and talk about how the future of America could look without this party system corrupting the roots of this house. I end my time.
All right, I'm going to start with a question Radish didn't want us to discuss here, which is how do you define a political party? You know, or K.
Yeah. So a political party is generally so there's outwards politics and inwards politics. It's a group of people, typically a committee that runs campaigns, manages finances, and seeks to get candidates placed on ballots or uphold the positions that they already have via control of the government to maintain control of the government.
So there's no socialist party in America. There's no libertarian party.
Libertarian
Is
Party is on the
that's what you're
ballot,
saying?
and the socialists there are, and they do have access to ballots. It's few ballots, but they do
Yeah.
have access to ballots.
So any party that can get on the ballot, that can get on a ballot now or in the future would be a political party. Yes.
As long as they meet the criteria of that they're running campaigns, managing finances, nominating their candidates, and seeking to access control of the government. Yes.
Hey, Gorps, do you mind if I ask him a
Okay.
question?
Not right now.
Is that loud?
No.
Okay.
Would you consider DSA a party? DSA specifically.
I don't. Who is the DSA specifically?
Democratic Socialists of America.
Oh, sorry, that's not the one that I know of. I don't know of them, so I can't answer.
Okay. We'll move on from that. Do you think that it is legal to abolish these parties?
You could do it within legal means. Yes.
Could you? Because what you end up doing is violating the First Amendment rights of every single American citizen. So I'll ask again, do you think it's legal
Yes, there's legal methods.
to violate the First Amendment?
You don't have to violate the First Amendment. One, you can make constitutional amendments. The Constitution is a living document, and built into a living document is the ability to change. And second off, the freedom of association doesn't explicitly have to rely off of political parties. It could be through political action groups, idea-based coalitions, and interest groups.
It could be, but you're removing a method, are you not? You're removing a method of association.
Correct.
Okay, so you're violating the First Amendment.
Sorry, just because
how-
wait. In the Second Amendment, don't we have like regulations on firearms?
We violate the Second Amendment as well as a country, and we should stop doing that. But
Sorry, do you think you
that's
could
a
yell
separate
fire
issue.
in a theater?
How
or-
would you enforce
Okay.
this? What would the penalty for a violation, for example, be?
Okay. I think the main way that we can enforce it, since it's a nonviolent crime, would be through removal from ballot access and or just in general the prevention of the government from actually upholding and the political parties, because they wouldn't exist without the upholdings of the government. So if they just simply do not enforce it, then it no longer becomes a political party.
All right. To start with, political parties are voluntary associations of people who share political beliefs. The First Amendment protects exactly that, the right to speak, assemble, and to organize around shared ideas. You can't ban people from forming political groups without banning their ability to speak collectively. Abolishing parties would require the government to police political association itself, which is the opposite of a free society and against the First Amendment. If the solution to political frustration is let's restrict the people's ability to organize, it's not reform, it's regression. Second point is that even if you could get past the First Amendment violation, which you can't, abolishing parties doesn't actually solve the issues that people complain about. Corruption, polarization, and the gridlock that my opponent mentioned aren't caused by the existence of parties. They're caused by the underlying incentives, money in politics, media ecosystems, winner take all elections, and at its very core, human nature. If you remove parties, those incentives don't disappear. Politicians will still form alliances, voting blocs, and informal coalitions. They'll just do it behind closed doors, without transparency, without labels, and without accountability. Parties at least make these political alliances visible. Abolishing them does not eliminate those factions. Thirdly, abolishing political parties makes it harder for everyday Americans to even cast their ballot rather than being easier. Parties serve as informational shortcuts. Most voters don't have the time to research hundreds of individual candidates and individual issues every time an election comes around. Party labels help people identify and understand a candidate's general worldview, priorities, and policy tendencies. Without that, the voters are left with a ballot full of names and no meaningful way to distinguish them. That doesn't empower voters, it overwhelms them. The people who benefit most from a no-party system are insiders, activists, and wealthy candidates who can afford to build personal brands. The people who lose are ordinary voters who rely on clear, accessible information to make decisions. So the question isn't, are political parties perfect? They're not. The question is whether abolishing them fixes anything. It doesn't. It violates constitutional rights, fails to address the real sources of political dysfunction, and it makes democratic participation harder for the average person. If we want better politics, the answer isn't to ban people from organizing. The answer is to improve transparency, reform incentives, and strengthen the system, not to eliminate one of the core ways Americans exercise their political freedoms. Thank you.
So, Gorps, you mentioned that if we got rid of political parties, it would prevent or if it would ban people from participating in the system. What did you mean by that?
I said it would ban them from organizing because at a certain point, any group of people of a consistent political ideology becomes a political party. That means everyday organizing, people like the DSA, the PSL, even like TPUSA would be political parties. You're banning them from organizing in this way.
Do you so you think that without an actual party, that it would be impossible to organize? You couldn't have people funding a
Well,
campaign.
if you go back to my actual definition, political parties are voluntary associations of people who share political beliefs. So, yes, you would not be able to organize without a political party.
But if you have the same political beliefs as somebody and you donated to them, let's say like as an
If
individual,
history has taught us
how would
anything,
that not be funding somebody who you support with certain beliefs?
That's not what I'm talking about when I'm
if
talking about like
history has
voluntary
taught us
associations.
anything,
I'm
it's
talking about
not
like organize people together. That would not be able to happen.
Okay. You also said that you wouldn't be able to, well, I guess if you have certain parties running, and let's say you have smaller parties that are kind of thrown out of the wayside, like if you have a smaller conservative party or a freedom party, for example, and we got rid of all political parties, they would be affected. Do you think that them not being able to organize gives them a less of a chance of winning or a better chance of winning if it were, non-denominational, for example?
I don't think it really matters their chance of winning. The problem is that in that scenario, when we're talking about people's chances of winning, you have an uneducated voter base that doesn't even know what they're voting for in the first place because they have no ability to distinguish between these people. We all know the majority
Okay,
of
so
voters are uneducated and don't know what they're talking about.
if people are informed now, and you
They're
also
not informed
mentioned
now.
the
They're
constitution.
not informed now. They're guided by the parties.
Well, how would you? So if they are guided by the parties, then wouldn't you say that the parties have control of who gets elected? They can just spread the message on who's the better
Well,
candidate. It wouldn't be
a
up to the
party
people.
has control on who they put on the ballot. Yes.
All right, I would say that's kind of a concession, but I'll end it there for my questioning. Cool. So I would just start out and say that this isn't about, people arguing if whether something is legal or not, or how we're going to get rid of political parties, or if it's the perfect system, but more so, or I should say, how we are getting rid of political parties, because we know the Democrat and Republican parties run an oligopoly over every other party in the country. So I would say it's a little bit disingenuous to say, "Oh, what about the poor third parties on the ballots that will get affected by this?" Because by eliminating them, would argue that the folks who support third parties will now have a better shot of getting their preferred policies into a chamber of Congress. So I would say that, America prides itself on being a democracy built on independent thought, debate, and representation. And our political system today is dominated by the two private organizations that were never mentioned in the Constitution or were explicitly warned against by the founders themselves. And political parties no longer organize ideas. They're essentially there to enforce loyalty and to fundraise. They reward obedience over judgment and punish anybody who thinks outside the party line. The lawmakers themselves are pressured to vote within their team, even if they know a policy is flawed, because crossing the aisle risks losing funding, committee positions, or their next election. That's not representation, in my view. It's basically a brand controlling their management. Parties also hardwire polarization into our system. Every issue becomes a zero sum battle, not because compromise is impossible, but because compromise is treated as betrayal. When one party wins, the other must lose, even if our country does too. Governing becomes less about solving problems and more about defeating the other side. And as voters, we've been conditioned to stop evaluating ideas altogether, and party labels act as shortcuts. If my party supports it, it must be good. If the other party supports it, it must be bad. And democracy shouldn't run on tribal loyalty, it should run on informed choice. Worst of all, political parties suppress better leadership. They gatekeep who can run, who gets funding, and who gets heard. Many of the most capable, ethical, and pragmatic people never make it on the ballot because they refuse to pledge ideological allegiance. So ending political parties wouldn't just eliminate disagreement, but it would eliminate the artificial teams that turn disagreement into dysfunction. It would force candidates to stand on their ideas, lawmakers to build coalitions issue by issue, and voters to think instead of root. If democracy is meant to represent people, not parties, then it is time to move past them. And that's all I had.
Yeah, so first things first, I'm going to address the last thing that you said. What would be the difference between a coalition and a party?
So I would say that a party right now has an actual well, right now they have elected leadership. A coalition could just be a group of people with a similar idea or a similar goal in mind. They don't actually have an elected leader position, or they don't have ways to fundraise the same way, or have certain, established donors, people of that nature. They're basically people who believe in the same thing.
Yeah, so without political parties, how do you expect that people would get elected?
Um, so essentially, right? You can still raise money on your own. You can have a website to get on a ballot. There are a certain amount of signatures that you would need to have to get on a ballot. I don't think that the way to get elected changes. You could argue that it's harder for people to fundraise from it. But again, that's a skill that all politicians usually have, is learning how to fundraise and how to make money. So I don't think that would stop anybody in particular unless you're just bad at that and organizing. But yeah.
Yeah. So, what becomes illegal the day after your plan passes? Does endorsing a slate? Does coordinating messaging, fundraising, only printing on a party label, or only printing a party label on the ballot?
Sorry, my mic kind of, or my ear kind of, your headphone kind of went out. But did you say what makes it illegal?
No, what would become illegal? Like endorsing a slate, coordinating messaging, fundraising, or just printing the label on the ballot?
What would become illegal? I don't feel like this system would have anything to like believe on what would be legal or illegal, right? You're kind of opening it up to everybody in this case. So there isn't an exact established rule here on how to fundraise or who you can endorse or who can endorse you and so on and so forth. So I'm not sure. I don't think that there's an illegality here.
So it would just be removing the label on the ballot. It wouldn't change anything else about the system.
Not that I can think of. I mean, unless you have a certain thing in mind, let me know. But I don't think it would be illegal.
Yeah, so do you have any idea of how you would remove political parties?
So you're asking so your question about removing parties as they are established today, if that would be illegal or not. Is that different from what you were just
No.
asking before? Because
So how would you go about removing political parties?
yeah, so I think that's something that I was going to say. I mentioned in the beginning where I don't think that we're not talking about legality here or the ways. It's if it would be a better way to have no political parties. Well, the prompt didn't say would it be legal to do this. It would be should we remove political parties? I mean, I don't know all. That's fine. I mean, I just think that's kind of a little bit different, but overall, if we're talking about the inner machinations of government, I'm sure that there are ways you can do it legally. I don't have them off the top of my head. So I would leave that to one of our other panelists to answer that more completely. But I'm just kind of arguing whether or not we should do it or not.
Yeah, so removing political parties would create an unstable, exclusionary political environment. Parties are nothing more than a political coordination mechanism. Removing political coordination would be disastrous for the efforts of having a functioning government. Parties are just a visible layer of coordination. Removing them only raises the barrier for entry for being a participating voter. And it would also result in politicians seeking other means to get themselves elected. There'd be more dark money, more more focus on endorsements, more focus on going on influencer podcasts and stuff like that, like Joe Rogan, even more so than what we already have now. And these things would have even more influence on who gets elected than it already does. Political parties give a layer of transparent coordination that allow voters to have a general idea of where candidates and their representatives fall on key positions. Without political parties, we would still form pseudo parties in the form of coalitions, as people naturally group together based on in-group and out-group systems. Politics with or without parties will come down to which in-group has better organizing and funding. Without political parties, how well politicians can get things done comes down to how well people can network. Getting elected comes down even more to how much money and how good your connections are uh, in order to get your name out there to voters. We think it's a popularity contest now. It will be monumentally worse without parties. Parties are a means for people to get their name out there, get funding, and have a basic method of organization to get legislation passed. That's my opening.
Yeah, so you really harped on the fact that all the issues that we have in our political system would change. It would be more of a popularity contest. There would be more dark money. How would
Mhm.
any of that be more significantly impacted?
Yeah, so if you remove the means on which people get their name out there, which is political parties, uh, the reliance on people needing to get their name out there through means of like raising money through specifically like dark money, PACs and stuff like that, is going to uh, increase significantly. The need for people to get their name out there through influencers and going on the news is going to uh, increase significantly because you no longer have that basic mechanism of getting your name out there that is the political party. Because when we look at the facts, the majority of people in America, regardless, already just go and vote on party lines.
So can you give me examples of dark money? Like what
Dark
methods would they use to get to push for to give their dark money out? And what like sources would they get that dark money from or to?
non the things that would technically qualify as dark money would be private companies, nonprofits, and political PACs would be the main things.
Okay, and you said that people would try to get influence through like influencers and stuff and like popular media, right? Off like smear campaigns you might talk about. If you think that why would they not do that now, even with our political parties?
They already do it now. The difference will be
Exactly.
the amount of focus that is put on it. So the big difference is that I accidentally muted myself. The institutionalization of it. Whereas like right now, you go on CNN, you go on people like uh, if you're on the right now, you go on like Joe Rogan. If you're on the left, there's a number of different people that you can go on from Kyle Kalinske to TYT. The focus on that is going to increase even more because you'd have to get your name out for people to recognize your name on the ballot.
Okay. Here's the thing. We've heard it a million times during elections that they push for candidates based on their electability, right? How popular they are with voters. Nothing else matters. The RNC doesn't like Trump as a person, but he's electable, so they push him. So if going to influencers and doing these media campaigns is what gets you across to voters, then why wouldn't they do that with the RNC and the DNC systems in place now?
Again, they already do. The difference is the transparency of it. When we're talking about like parties, so without parties, they would effectively, uh, like I said, they would form pseudo parties or coalitions that are even less transparent than what we already have currently in government. So parties are a mechanism for transparency because we already get a loose idea of what people believe based off of which party they're running under.
Okay. The Trump presidencies have set forth the record for the most total government shutdown days in American history, with a total of 79 days out of the 5 years he has spent in the presidency so far. This means that we have entered a place where the Congress failing to do its most fundamental function is the new normal. Each time one of these shutdowns has happened, it has been preceded and proceeded by a partisan back and forth in the media, which rose to such a level that negotiations have become impossible. This has also become the new standard. Um, the mindset driven by the existence of political parties has been so corrupted by petty team sports conflicts that coming together and working towards the interest of the population takes a back seat. Voters hold positions based on their party lines, and moving them from these positions is impossible. Their rationality and better nature are set aside for loyalty. Politicians then represent those positions with little to no variation, causing further gridlock among possible positions that anyone can hold, both politicians and voters. This dynamic runs in counter to the one which our founding fathers had, which where all involved in the government recognized and respected each other as allies in the pursuit of serving their country and its people. I would advocate for the disempowerment of political parties, both legally and within culture. I would advocate if we were to remove legal privileges that the Democratic and Republican parties have, we'd start to put forth politicians based on policy, and our cultural standards would change. And that is my opening.
Okay, so I just want to ask you. I don't think. Are you aware of how people with common political ideologies cluster together to form political coalitions? As in, like,
Yes.
are you aware of the psychology behind this?
Yes.
So you know about
I
the
mean,
SVO,
I have my own
the
opinions
SDO.
on why this happens.
Okay, that's great. So do you agree that psychology, and there's a lot of research on this, okay, shows that even if we try to remove political parties, they're going to happen naturally, correct?
To an extent, there will be more probably like progressive and conservative groups of people.
No, it's
but
just,
not.
again, I need to know what your definition of a political party is.
So
Is
a
it-
political party in our country is an establishment which is given both political and political privileges, and is built into the position to the way that we hold
Like state
elections.
recognized, or
Yeah, state recognized.
okay, so what about if it can fundraise?
If they can
Not state
fundraise,
recognized, but can fundraise.
I mean, you can have official political parties and you can have independent groups fundraise.
Okay, I'm getting a really unclear answer from all three of you guys. Again, I'm going to defer back to the answer or the question that Vigilantes said. What exactly would you change? What would you make illegal to get rid of political parties?
So the main thing is changing the way that political parties have control over our election system, right? So they can
Just
control who.
institutionalized? You want to deinstitutionalize them, or
Yes, deinstitutionalize them.
okay? So you don't want to ban association, though, right?
No, I don't want to fully ban association. No.
Okay, so that's just cosmetic. That has nothing to do with the prompt. The prompt is very clear. The burden here is you have to prove that we need to remove political parties. That is not the prompt. That is not abolition.
Well, I mean, you can say it's just cosmetic, but the power that they have over the election system and saying, well, the only people who can participate in the major election are people who are part of our
That's
party,
not answering my
who are
question.
coming from the.
That's just something else.
Okay, what is your question? Give your
My
exact
question again is you're not actually,
That's not a
doing the
question.
prompt. The prompt, you have to, there's a burden of proof here, since you're the affirmative, is you have to prove that we need to get rid of political parties. Right now, you're doing something cosmetic. That is very important right here.
Okay, that is a comment, not a question. So what is your
Okay,
question?
take the comment.
You asked me to directly answer your question. What is the direct question?
The question is, how are you actually going to remove political parties? And what you just said is not removing them.
By giving them removing their official recognition in elections?
I just want to start with like a quick reality check, okay? Get rid of political parties isn't a tweak. It's a ban on voluntary association, okay? And that runs straight into the First Amendment. I don't think we heard a First Amendment answer yet for the question that we asked in the beginning. And honestly, that's not reform. Like I just mentioned, it's state control. So the question for the other side is simple. How do you erase parties without erasing freedom? That's the number one thing I need to hear. And even if you tried, people don't stop grouping. There's plenty of psychological research on this, mountains of evidence, unless there's something that I have not heard or something you have the contrary that would overcome things like the SVO, the SDO, and how people would just form coalitions and political parties, whether you wanted to ban it or not. And that means like neighbors, unions, churches, anything that fundraise, right? As state recognition alone is not, if you just get rid of that, but you can still allow some things to fundraise, you haven't solved the problem. Party labels are messy, yes, but they're also a low friction map for busy citizens. Remove the map and you don't get purity, you get more confusion. So the average barrier to entry for your average voter is going to be extremely high. It's unreasonable to assume that an individual is going to vote and care on an individual level or a hyper individual level. So naturally, again, you're going to see political parties form without, when you even try to remove political parties. So I just want to say that there'll be higher costs to participate, and then the shadow parties will get worse with transparency. And the reason for this is because the government requires transparency. The institutionalization of these political parties makes it so they require transparency. That is why you would get more dark money, like you mentioned earlier. Now, in group favoritism, in coalition forming, and research and cooperation, SVO, SDO, authoritarian dispositions predicts this. And if you want trust across ideology, you address that psychology. You don't pretend advantages. And that's my opening.
Okay, yeah. You keep on saying that it's a First Amendment violation and that it wasn't addressed, but I think I remember directly saying that there is a legal way we can ratify the Constitution that is legal, that's
You want to
doable,
change the
that's something
Constitution then.
that exists. Yeah, I mean, we have amendments. What do you think amendments are in the Constitution?
Okay, so that would solve the First Amendment only by changing it. Okay, which would dismantle core associational protections.
And I mean, that's also assuming that this is a legality case when this is clearly
It is. There's
question of
versus
should you
Republican
do
Party of
something,
Connecticut.
not whether it's. But okay.
There's Tasha versus Republican Party of Connecticut. There's EU versus San Francisco County Democratic Central Committee. I mean, I can go on and on and on, but
What you should always do? Does legal mean you always should do something?
no, I never said that.
Okay, well then why are we having a conversation about the legality when we have already established there is legal processes, so we know it can be done?
No, that's fine. That's
so
fine.
the next question
Now
is,
let's move
should we do
forward.
it?
The next,
Yes,
the
let's
next part is you have to tell me how you would do that.
Yeah.
How would you do
Okay.
that
Thank
without
you.
ruining
Okay.
the First
So.
Amendment?
Okay, yeah, I don't think it's a radical idea to solve the problem. There's a few things we could do. We could do non-partisan ballots. We can prevent
That is not removing political parties.
You were asking me what this would do. Do you want me to continue?
I need to hear you say a way you would get rid of political parties, not
It would get rid of political parties.
like ranked choice voting, bro. That's not the same thing.
Nonpartisan ballots. I would get rid of committees associated between representatives that are, because we vote in the representatives through outward politics with the coalitions and the PACs and stuff. It would prevent the inward forming of politics where like Democrats can form together in parties in Congress and the House.
I heard you say inward
pretty
and
much
outward
subvert
earlier.
representative. Yes.
What are your definitions of that? Do you know what those two definitions mean, inward and outward politics?
Yes, outward is when the people push policy, push money. Inward is when sitting representatives and government officials push policy and push money around and so forth.
So political parties are coalition machines for both. You know that, right?
Yes.
It actually
Political
proves that
parties
they're
can
not just a tribal label. So you're admitting that parties exist because coordination is hard in both areas, right?
No.
And the outward politics here is
reword that?
where I said you're admitting.
So coalitions exist for
that-
both. Yes.
And that means you're admitting that there's coordination going on here. Political parties allow for strong coordination.
Oh yeah, it allows for coordination between the people that are already
So
sitting
are you
in
removing
power
political
and
parties
using.
or are you not? I'm confused.
Yes, I just said so.
All right.
Coalitions outside, outward coalitions aren't political parties. Political parties refer to the system in place to use governance and
outward
legislature
politics,
to elect sitting.
How would you
Yes.
implement a ban on political parties?
Yeah. So basically, you would outlaw and make it illegal, and through code of ethics and legislation for sitting members to form committees within elected officials to form committees within the House, Senate, and other government positions, and outlaw the use of those for them to coordinate money, power, influence to move power to influence elections to make sure that they keep on sitting or that a policy gets pushed. So basically, this would make it so the people that fundraise, push policy, and recommend it would be constituents, and that the people that can't do that would be already sitting there because we had already voted them in to sit there and represent us. If they start forming groups to do shit and use the government to prevent us from holding them accountable and electing somebody else, those committees are subverting the democracy and the representation. So it would ban that particularly.
Okay.
And if they engaged with that, they would be removed, fined, punished, the same way that any other code of ethics violation, or, there would be a whole process.
So how do you maintain transparency in the case there are no established parties?
I mean, the same laws that we have now would apply to candidates that are running, right? You would have to disclose where you're getting your money from. You would have to disclose who is funding your campaign. So if you run a campaign ad, oh, it was paid by so and so. This is where I got it, and just standard disclosures.
Okay.
The same regulations that apply now to parties can apply to individuals.
In your open, you mentioned that 45% of Americans are independent, and then 27% are split Democratic and Republican Party. What if you got rid of political parties? How would you ensure the representation that you're looking for without those sort of labels?
Yeah, so it's not a guarantee of representation, just a better form of that likelihood that you would be represented, because obviously you could be like in the minority group, but essentially this causes people to have more grassroots local support for when they're running. They're going to have to go to action groups, interest groups, coalitions, schools and stuff, and start, fundraising, getting the message out there, which means intrinsically they would have to have more local support in order to make it to a national stage. And because they're not, because they're being elected directly from um, to represent what we want. So it's like, hey, we want you to go do X, Y, and Z. We're electing you based on those policies you ran for. And now with these new laws in place, they can't go behind and be like, hey, Mitch McConnell, hey, whoever else I want, we're going to do X, Y, and Z that I didn't agree with. And pretty much they're going to have to eat shit because I'm going to run unopposed. Because remember, you won't run against me, and I won't. You won't run against me. We'll give you your turn when I step down, and I'll be the only opposition to the Republican Party, which they won't vote for because it's a blue state, or vice versa for red. So they would have to be held strictly more accountable because of the amount of people that can run and the amount of the restrictions on their ability to pretty much rig staying in place.
So a theme from your entire team has been to discuss the First Amendment's rights to free association. Are there currently, to the best of your knowledge, any other groups in the United States that it would be banned or illegal to join? Any other groups, organizations, etc., that would be considered illegal to be a member of?
The only I could think of would be like terrorist organizations.
If, in this case, political parties were to remain as they are, like in the sense that we currently have a situation where you have MAGA and then you have the Republican Party. You could make the case that MAGA is not the Republican Party. So with that being the case, does this muddying of the waters create an undue hardship on voters in the same way abolishing parties would be in the first place?
Not in the same way. I think that you're right. There is kind of a distinction between MAGA and like a traditional conservative Republican. But this is still less muddy than like having no parties at all. If you think about it, like you kind of know the general idea of what a Republican, whether it's a MAGA Republican or a conservative old school Republican, you have a general idea of where they're going to be and how that's different from the other people on the ballot because of the party that they're associated with. So there's still clarity there. It's not perfect, of course, but I also think that we should have more parties so that that is more specific, so that you can have a MAGA and then a Republican and then a Libertarian and a Democrat and a Socialist and throw a communist in there for fun.
If we eliminated political parties, but still had grassroots organizations and interest groups and different smaller coalitions, would that maintain the freedom of association?
Well, I think those would just take the place of the Democrats and Republicans now. So you would end up in the exact same situation unless you're going to keep eliminating them, in which case, yes, you're still violating the freedom of association.
So you were talking earlier in your opening about how getting rid of political parties would increase the likelihood of people's independence, actual policy wishes to be implemented. Would it not also accomplish that same goal would that not also be accomplished by adding more parties as opposed to removing all parties?
Well, that's the problem, is that not all parties are represented as equally. I think my argument is that the Democratic and Republican machines overpower third parties to the extent where anybody else is non-viable, and that's why you have a two-party system that many people complain about, is because they feel like they aren't able to get specific policy prescriptions that they align with. They have to pick to the next best thing for them.
If both the parties are just oligopolies and this is all kayfabe, they're doing the exact same thing, what could legally be put in place, or what could be put in place to disincentivize this?
Yeah, so I think the question that keeps popping up is like, how do you ban political parties? But that's not the prompt. That's not what we're proposing. We're proposing that political parties become obsolete enough through certain prescriptions, like removing legal privileges, adding ballot control, breaking financial dependence, forcing candidates to compete as individuals. So over time, this isn't going to happen in a day or a week or a month or a year. Over time, when you remove these things, political parties become more obsolete, and it opens up the framework for individuals to compete on a ballot level, right? And so over time this happens and people start getting elected based on grassroots organization and policies rather than platforms or whatever the DNC RNC says, and you'll start to see people vote for individuals over certain parties.
It kind of sounded like you were saying that a lack of good fundraising for any politician would kind of be a skill issue, but with an added need for more individuals to be focused on fundraising, like would that be a good thing to have that added focus on the money, whereas the political party would kind of alleviate some of that pressure with some guaranteed backing?
Yeah, and again, I'll point back to my opening where I said it's not a perfect system, but I would say it's a better system, because right now you're having political organizations like the DNC and RNC pick candidates based on who they prefer, and setting up money and fundraising for them through Act Blue or Win Red. So I think if you had certain individuals or even high spend or high earning individuals who support a grassroots candidate, I think that's a good thing. I know that obviously through money in politics isn't going to be overturned by the Supreme Court anytime soon. So as long as that's still um, in motion, I think that relying on people with money, if you're still somebody who is grassroots or lesser known and not in politics, it's better than having a party control you through those means, because then they can make you say certain things or do certain things rather than an individual who can't really control you at the same level. So I still think it's a better outcome.
During your opening, one of the things that you said were beneficial about party politics was that parties give us transparent motivations. Do you believe that? I'm going to assume that you're aware of the Satanist transgender person who got voted into office because they ran as a Republican. Why do you believe that parties offer motivational transparency if people can label themselves as any party they choose to?
Yeah, so I mean, there are definitely going to be some clear outliers whenever it comes to people running in certain areas for just to have the label to have a higher chance of getting on the ballot. Um, uh, there was actually a point in time where I personally was in a very deep red district here in Ohio, that I was going to run as a Republican because it would give me more transparency on the ballot. Now, whenever it comes down to the actual political motivations of parties, parties always establish a party platform. The DNC does it, and the Republican Party do it. The Republican Party's one for the most part this past year was effectively just the Project 2025 agenda, even though they just reworded a lot of it. It and then the parties, the people who are actually part of the parties are effectively meant to are strong armed, I should say, into following the party platform. You're going to have some party outliers. Like a great example of like a party outlier, at least when they first got into office, would be AOC, or like the whole squad for the most part, actually, where like a lot of the party alliance votes early on, they just kind of refused to participate because of their own, and they still do sometimes, because of their own personal agenda.
You made the argument that removing the parties would create chaos and destroy the coordinating factor on the visible layer where dark money and other things would be less transparent. In the case that an outside, the party becomes hijacked by an outside interest, like say Palantir, or like you said with the Heritage Foundation, is it better to keep the parties in place or to push for a reform or removal of the party?
It's better to keep the parties in place, because with the parties in place, you can visibly see and understand that the party has been hijacked by these interests. Whereas without the parties in place, then you would have to basically look at each person individually and see if they've been bought off by the special interest groups like the Heritage Foundation. Now, it is obviously fine for us to reform the system in order to remove the ability for special interest groups like the Heritage Foundation to be able to have as much influence on the parties as they do, which I would argue would actually be a better way to handle this than just to straight up remove political parties, because without having political parties there as the mechanism for organization, you would effectively allow dark money interests like the Heritage Foundation to just bribe their way into influence of just each individual person who gets into office, versus having to force their way into control of an entire party.
Considering that, I think in the cross-examination, you mentioned that there could be a fear without political parties of it becoming more of a popularity contest where networking could become more important than ideas. But, especially if we kept some of the regulation for transparency for the money in our politics in place, like, would it not be an improvement if some of that networking and fundraising was more, localized and from the community?
It wouldn't necessarily cause it to be more localized, because you'd still have a lot of big money interests, like say Walmart, for example, going and funding campaigns in basically all over the country. You'd still have oil companies going and funding campaigns all over the country. The only thing that it would really get rid of is the clear, transparent method of them funding the campaigns, because with the way that the transparency works now, the majority of the funding goes through either political PACs or it goes through parties. Whenever it goes through the parties in particular, all of the donor information is released directly to the public. Now, political PACs aren't really required to release their funding information, which is part of the problem. But that money goes in through the party is when that's released to the public, that's the primary method of transparency on how we know where their actual funding is coming from.
What would be the alternative? What would be replaced in your mind?
Well, it will be like grassroots organizations, more various organizations, and then at the election level, it would just be individuals who are standing on their on platforms and positions, right? Vote for me because I believe in Medicare, right? Not vote for me, I'm a Democrat.
If there were no parties and you're not abolishing it, but the legal institution, what would stop a corporation from creating something on the lines of an industry plant, like, installing or finding somebody in a community and paying to make sure that this person seems like, what people view Bernie Sanders as?
Right. So obviously, like we can, there's never going to be no funding in politics. So there, corporations will still have the ability to fund and maybe even give a little bit of exposure to. But we can have along the lines of how we have monopoly laws preventing corporations from like covering like having an entire control of a market. We can prevent organizations and companies from preventing anyone except for their candidates to exist within the political space for them being nominated. So if they're saying like, oh, we're going to go to all these press companies and make sure they're the only ones who get press, or oh, we're gonna like come together with all these other companies and make sure only these people are the ones getting funding, and we're not going to let anyone else get funding from other sources. Stuff like that. That would be like that would be along the lines of what we have for monopoly laws.
And at one point, you had mentioned that petty team sports get in the way, making negotiations impossible. What's the biggest example of legislation that would pass with bipartisan support, if not for these petty team sports?
Um, well, if we were to go to get away from like people fighting each other to get one over on the other party, like off the top of my head, I would use the example that I used in my opening, which is government shutdowns. We saw the last one where like the Republican Congress was, or I would say it's more the Republican Congress. People would disagree, but both parties were coming forth with their solutions, and neither of them were willing to budge whatsoever on their position and their put forward policy. And there was a lot of shenanigans where, like the Republican Party put forth their counteroffer at the very last minute, stuff like that. Again, like it's a huge, massive thing to have a government shutdown, and they were letting it go by to get one over on their political opponent.
In your opening, you alluded to the fact that getting rid of the political parties would create a situation where the vast majority of voters would be undereducated in the correct way to vote, implying that
Correct. No,
I'm sorry,
just informed.
okay, would be ill-informed voters. That's it. What that sounds like to me is that you don't think that the average person is capable of informing themselves sufficiently for democracy to work. So my question to you is, do you, Circa, believe that democracy is a myth?
No. I said the barrier to entry. So it's not that people aren't capable, it's that realistically they would be underinformed because parties, because of their cooperative nature, they're also the biggest strengths of political parties are its biggest weakness. So parties allow for cooperation. That is a fact. There's tons of evidence for this. And the best way to make sure that people get informed is through parties, unfortunately. People thinking the same thing, joining coalitions together, associating. Without that, an individual who's thinking specifically on an individual level, trying to vote, it's unreasonable to assume that they would have all of the information. when all they're doing is voting for themselves on an individual level. It's hard for them to care even. So it's not that they're not capable. It's just realistically they would there'd be extreme cooperation issues, which would lead to less information for people.
Let me get to my questions. So basically, the idea that you put forward is that either way, parties will form naturally, and this is just a psychological conclusion based on the data. Is it a subversion of nature that the two-party system is the primary system at the moment?
Subversion of nature, as in like it's not a natural way to go, or what natural way it should be.
I mean, considering the idea that
Form?
people would be forming parties all over, the fact that the two-party system, like Republicans and Democrats, are the two primary, and nothing else
Yeah.
really gets the same level of deference.
So the problem here is, and I like your question, Leafy. It's just the prompt is very specific, right? It says get rid of, which means banning or materially suppressing citizens' ability to form political associations. So I do think it is subversion in a way that the United States only has a two-party system. There are plenty of ways in which we could fix this to correct that. I don't think it's relevant to this debate, though.
As I had mentioned in a previous, in an earlier question to another debater, they had mentioned that without political parties, there would be more grassroots organization, interest groups, and coalitions. Is this just political parties with extra steps or getting it? Yep.
It's just a different label. 100%.
I know that this isn't a one solution to fix all problems, and I haven't said that it will. We have to tackle a lot of things, such as the Citizens United in the room, do away with national popular vote interstate compacts, have single bill issue bills to vote on, roll out ranked choice or star voting. It's a system that relies on other systems, but if your car has multiple problems, you don't just not fix one, you start fixing one at a time so the car can eventually run properly. A mile is not run in one step, but rather one step at a time until you reach the end goal. Parties are inward politics that allow a politician to avoid accountability for their poor representation and use funds and influence to strong arm you into voting for their party, their government, use their legislation to make you go through their candidate, sometimes even using your money. Because if you don't, then you don't even get a say at all. This is a proposal from my side for decentralization because I think we all can agree that we've had too much government control in our lives. And I thought an anarchist like Gorp would agree. It's unfortunate he doesn't. This isn't a radical idea either. This is something that has been tried before in America. Nebraska already does it for their state legislator. 80% of local elections are ran. Remember that. The most trustworthy and most favored form of our government is ran on non-partisan ballots. They exist, they run, they work, and they work better than how our government is working now. How do we get the money? Grassroots funding, donations, raising campaigns. How would we coordinate? How would they coordinate? Well, their purpose is to propose and vote on bills, not coordinate how to redistrict, rig elections, and make sure that their candidate gets an upper hand in the next election. How would you be able to balance the funding? Well, we would address the Citizens United. We allow voucher system programs like they do in Japan and are now testing in Seattle and rolling it out. How would voters be informed? Well, I would say they're already not informed since they're looking at it and they're like, okay, red or blue. I guess I'll vote for whichever team I think I might vaguely like. Ask any Trump supporter what Trump's policies are. They will not give you an answer. Ask any Biden supporter what his policies were and what he did in his term. They will not give you an answer. This causes a person to look and actually listen and be a little bit more informed on their vote and policy. Government isn't meant to sit there and coordinate to fuck you. It's meant to represent you. It's simple. People run elections, not parties. Vote on issues, not party lines. They represent us. We shouldn't capitulate to who they choose. Simply put.
Simply put, this prompt was about whether or not we should remove physical parties. This means the full, not partial removal, not taking a party label off of a ballot, not making them obsolete over time, removal of the party. This is something that none of our opponents have actually addressed, something that none of them have actually agreed with, which should say enough about their positions. No one adequately defended the First Amendment violation aside from to just say, let's change the Constitution, which, first of all, would not have the support of the American people, I don't believe. I don't think you could convince the American people or our politicians to diminish the First Amendment. At the end of the day, even if that were to happen and we were not to be allowed to have political parties, people will still continue to form groups. People will still continue to say, hey, I agree with you on these policies. Let's hang out together. And this will continue to grow until we have parties yet again. If they're made illegal, they will just become underground. You lose every form of visibility and oversight over political parties by making them illegal. To what Kay just said, where voters currently are on the vote red or blue, I'll vote for whichever one I like, that's the exact point. Most of these voters have a couple issues that they actually care about, and they know which party vote the way that they want on that issue. You're not going to get a more informed populace by having no red or blue or libertarian. You're going to get people that just don't vote. You're going to reduce our already generally pretty low turnout by making it harder for voters to actually figure out who they like. We would also, again, as I said before, and as my opponents haven't really been able to say anything about, you would also be removing the ability for any organization, a DSA, a libertarian group, a neo-Nazi group. You'd be removing the ability for any of them to be able to organize together and try to get on a ballot. At the end, the individual people here would not be getting any support if it were not for the groups that back them. The only reason that Zoran Mamdani is the mayor of New York City right now is because the DSA, the Democratic Socialists Party, supported him and backed him the entire way. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah. So I know that the word get rid of has caused the other side to believe that means that you have to ban something. Remember, we don't need to ban a political party to get rid of them. We can simply outgrow them. And I would point to a specific instance that happened back in the election in 2024 during the Nevada Republican nominating cycle. The state ended up with two separate contests, a state run primary and a party organized caucus. Because the party leadership chose to ignore the primaries and instead hold their own delegate awarding process. As a result, the candidate most Republicans actually rallied behind in the later caucus wasn't even on the primary ballot. And in the primary, the none of these candidates option beat the only major candidate on the ballot, which was Nikki Haley at the time. That confusion was not an accident. It was a product of the party rules and incentives, not voter priorities, because most voters aren't thinking about caucuses versus primaries. They're thinking about housing costs, healthcare, jobs, and fairness. And yet the system still funnels them into gimmicky contests that reward party insiders and organizational maneuvering while ignoring the independent voters actually what independent voters actually care about. So we don't have to chase corporations out of sports stadiums. We can make parties a worse option for voters by designing a system that rewards transparency, accessibility, and individual accountability instead. Because right now, what the parties have designed is what the rules are. So we can reverse the rules that the parties have created. When people see that candidates succeed by addressing real policy concerns, not by gaming party structures, political parties naturally lose their leverage. That's how you outcompete them and restore power to party policy focused voters, because a system that empowers people instead of machines is ultimately the best defense against tribalism and dysfunction.
It has become increasingly clear that the affirmative position is not to get rid of political parties, but to deinstitutionalize them, which is not a clear answer on the prompt. This is just take the parties out of the open and make them operate behind closed doors. Kay stated during the Q&A section that we would get rid of committees as part of this. Committees are a key aspect of political organization. Committees are literally how we flesh out bills before they hit the floor of Congress. The idea that removing coordination would be a good thing is absolutely absurd. and comes from a fundamental lack of understanding of how politics works. In order to write a bill, you have to have organization and cooperation, let alone in order to pass said bill. Politics is a social game. You have to make 269 people agree on an issue, 51 in the Senate, 218 in the House. In order to get a large number of people like this to agree on something and to pass it, you have to have organization in order to make sure the solution meets the agenda of everybody involved to the extent that it can. The largest part of this debate is that it seems like the affirmative thinks that it would be would be more effective to remove altogether the parties altogether than to expand the systematic access of other political parties to be able to access the system. I would argue that it would be more effective for us to remove the polling aspects for getting on the ballot and require all states to list candidates from all parties who want to throw a dog into the race, alongside institutionalizing some form of ranked choice voting. The coalitions that would form by removing parties would be no different than the parties that we have now. They would be the same in-group and out-group system that we already have, just with less visibility on what the groups are doing behind closed doors. Politics is a social system and a social game. It is a team sport by nature. With the way we have it set up now, we already see the effects of having broad sweeping political ideals set up on the main stage. You have the progressives and the liberals in the Democratic Party that form two separate blocks. You have the neocons and MAGA for the GOP that form two separate blocks. Removing political parties would only worsen this problem by removing the allegiance that party members have to their parties. The only way to solve this would be to expand the access for other parties to access the voting system, not to remove parties altogether.
Okay, so it seems as though the opposition has two somewhat contradictory points. And I'll address the first one, which is that, well, political parties are a good thing because the voters are so uninformed and so incapable of making a decision that they need a party to bundle up all their ideas, or else they'll be completely incapable of making a decision. I I think anyone, if they're being honest, would agree that it's not to that level. While they're not completely informed on all aspects of a policy or a politician, every single or most people, the average person, I would say about 80% of the people who vote have a position on most policy, most major policy that is being pushed, right? And the second position is that, well, it is a bad thing. Corruption, organization, people coming together and forming organizations is kind of a bad thing because it does create polarization, but we can't do anything to stop it. Ending all these privileges and all these positions that political parties have isn't enough because people will still gather anyways, and it's not enough, right? Which kind of shows the weakness of their position, where they don't even really support political parties as an organization or as an existence very strongly. And they're kind of trying to strawman us and pigeonhole us by saying, well, if we want to be against political parties, then we have to absolutely advocate for the most extreme measures to outlaw them. We need to bring, like, almost have raids on any kind of organization or any kind of meeting that anyone does over politics. And I think that is absurd. And I think that is really unfair. And it places political parties as just organizations, groups of people who are coming together and agreeing on politics. And that's obviously not what they are. Political parties are major establishments that are supported by the government and have a hold on the electoral process. Getting rid of their hold on the electoral process would remove political parties as they exist today. And doing so would be enough to say, remove what we have as political parties. Obviously, nobody supports getting rid of any kind of political organization, any grassroots movement, any communion of people. Okay, and that's my closing.
All right. So, I want to say that this debate felt like I was chasing the various different versions and definitions of this specter, and that specter being the affirmative conclusion, which even at this point I feel like is unclear. There's tons of evidence to show that political parties, even if we decided to, I guess, hope that they would go away, is not the case, just by nature of how humans act socially. And I want to describe, I want to say if their plan is constitutional, parties do not disappear. And if their plan makes parties disappear, it is not constitutional. They're trying to solve factions by banning factions, and a free system channels association. It does not ban them. It does not just remove them or pretend they don't exist, because they do. And I'm just going to bring it back to the main problems we're kind of having here. Get rid of means banning or materially suppressing citizens' abilities to form durable political associations that recruit, endorse, coordinate candidates, plan, and that requires state coercion, and it triggers serious First Amendment issues. If you think that we can just deinstitutionalize them, then you are failing the prompt. And the only way to get rid of political parties, at least in the affirmative's eyes, is to downgrade associational freedom because they think that it will work. Then the cure is worse than the disease in this case. And that's my closing.